What if I told you that Prince William has just uncovered a secret financial scandal so serious that it could permanently damage Prince Harry's already fragile reputation? A revelation so explosive that senior palace officials were forced into an emergency meeting at Sandringham. And for the first time, William himself is the one demanding full accountability from his own brother. According to insiders, the scandal began with a quiet audit ordered by King Charles. What was supposed to be a routine review of charitable funds linked to the Sussex office accidentally exposed a trail of money transfers that raised immediate red flags. Suspicious payments routed through private accounts, unreported sponsorship deals, and a mysterious consulting fee paid to an unknown American entity that investigators say has no legitimate business history. When the preliminary report landed on William's desk, he was stunned. Sources say he spent hours reviewing documents that suggested Harry may have been leveraging royal connections long after stepping back, potentially violating agreements he had personally signed when leaving the monarchy. But the real shock came when William requested access to restricted financial correspondence. Hidden within a confidential folder were encrypted messages and receipts that pointed to something far more intentional, far more calculated than anyone inside the palace had expected. Why were these transactions concealed? Who authorized them? And why did Harry insist on moving certain funds offshore just months before his public feud with the family reached its peak? Tonight, we follow the trail William uncovered, a trail that could reshape the future of the monarchy and expose the truth behind Harry's financial empire. Because make no mistake, this time, William is not staying silent. On this particular morning, William woke before dawn with a feeling he couldn't shake. He slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to disturb Catherine. She had been through enough already. Down the long corridor he walked, past portraits of ancestors who had faced their own impossible choices, until he reached his private study. The room smelled of old books and leather, familiar and somehow comforting. He closed the door behind him and stood there for a moment, gathering the courage to face what waited on his desk. The documents were exactly where he had left them the night before. Financial records, transaction histories, account statements, all stamped with official seals and signed by people whose job it was to know the truth. William sank into his chair and spread the papers across the mahogany surface, his hands trembling slightly as he traced the numbers with his finger. Every line, every entry, every carefully hidden payment told the same story. His brother had been involved in something that could destroy them all. "This cannot be real," he whispered to the empty room, even though he knew it was. Harry, his little brother, the boy who used to follow him everywhere, who laughed too loud and broke too many rules, who carried their mother's spirit in a way William never could. How had it come to this? William closed his eyes and let the memories wash over him. Summers at Balmoral when they were still innocent, nights when they conspired together against the endless rules of royal life, the unspoken promise that no matter what happened, they would always be brothers. William picked up one particular document and read it again, hoping he had misunderstood. He hadn't. The trail was clear, money moving through accounts that should not exist, connections to people who operated in shadows, agreements signed with names that made William's blood run cold. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was something that could shake the very foundations of the institution he had sworn to protect. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, his voice rough with exhaustion. The door opened, and his most trusted advisor entered, a man named Richard, who had served the family for 30 years. Richard's face was grave as he approached the desk carrying a manila folder that looked thin but felt heavy with significance. "Your Royal Highness, I'm afraid there's more," Richard said quietly, placing the folder before William. William didn't want to open it. He wanted to sweep everything off his desk, walk away, pretend none of this was happening. Instead, he reached for the folder with steady hands and pulled out the contents. New information, fresh evidence, connections that reached further than he had imagined, touching corners of power that should have remained separate from royal affairs. "How deep does this go?" William asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. "Deep enough that silence is no longer an option, sir. William stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where morning light was just beginning to touch the roses Catherine had planted. Somewhere out there, ordinary people were waking up to ordinary problems, bills to pay, children to feed, jobs to attend. They trusted the crown to be above the mess of corruption and scandal. They believed even now that royalty meant something more than just wealth and privilege. "He's my brother," William said, more to himself than to Richard. "Yes, sir, but you're also the future king." There it was, the terrible truth that had haunted William his entire life. He could not be just a brother, just a son, just a man. He was a symbol, a guardian of something larger than family loyalty. His personal feelings, his love for Harry, his desperate wish that things could be different, none of that mattered when measured against duty. "Prepare the necessary documents," William said finally, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "Schedule the meeting. It's time." Richard nodded and quietly left the room, understanding that his prince wanted a moment alone with this impossible choice. William sat back down and rested his head in his hands. Somewhere across the ocean, Harry was probably sleeping peacefully, unaware that his older brother was about to do something that would change both their lives forever. The truth was coming out of the shadows, whether they were ready or not. What happens when the bond of brotherhood collides with the burden of a crown, a secret he can no longer run from? Prince Harry had always been the one with fire in his heart. He was warm and genuine, the kind of person who remembered your name and asked about your family. On this quiet afternoon, Harry stood at the window of his home, watching clouds drift across the sky. Everything appeared peaceful from the outside, but inside his chest, anxiety twisted like a knot, pulling tighter with each passing hour. He tried to focus on ordinary things. He made himself tea, checked messages on his phone, arranged papers on his desk that didn't need arranging, all the little rituals people perform when they're trying to convince themselves that everything is fine. But his hands shook slightly as he lifted the teacup, and the words on his phone screen blurred together without meaning. "Get yourself together," he muttered, setting down the cup before he could drop it. The problem was that he couldn't stop his mind from racing backward, retracing steps he had taken years ago. It had started so innocently, or at least that's what he told himself. Just some financial arrangements, some opportunities that came his way through people who seemed trustworthy at the time. He had been under so much pressure back then, pressure to prove himself, to build something independent, to escape the endless comparisons to his brother. The decisions had seemed small at first. Sign this paper, move money through that account. Trust these people who promised they had his best interests at heart. Each choice felt manageable in the moment, but together they had created something much larger and more dangerous than he had ever intended, like building a house on sand. It looked solid until the tide came in. Harry closed his eyes and saw their faces in his memory, the smooth-talking advisors who had promised him freedom and fortune, the associates who operated in gray areas where law and ethics became blurry. He had wanted so badly to believe them, to trust that someone was finally on his side, helping him build a life that belonged to him alone. "I was such a fool," sir, he whispered. He had buried those arrangements deep, convinced himself they were handled and forgotten. For months, even years, he had managed to push them to the back of his mind, focusing instead on the life he was trying to build. But secrets have a way of refusing to stay buried. They rise up like bodies in water, breaking the surface when you least expect them. The phone rang, shattering the silence like broken glass. Harry stared at it for 3 rings before finding the courage to answer. The number wasn't one he recognized, but something told him this call was important. His finger hovered over the screen, heart pounding against his ribs. "Hello." The voice on the other end was calm, almost gentle, which somehow made it more terrifying. "Your Highness, I think we need to talk about certain financial matters that have come to light." Harry's throat went dry. "I don't know what you're referring to." "I believe you do." There was no accusation in the tone, just certainty. The accounts in Geneva, the payments to offshore entities, The signatures that bear your name. The room seemed to tilt around him. How did they know? Who were they? Harry gripped the edge of his desk to steady himself, mind racing through possibilities and consequences. Who is this? He demanded, trying to sound authoritative despite the fear crawling up his spine. Someone who has seen the evidence? Someone who knows the connections you tried so hard to hide? A pause heavy with meaning. You should prepare yourself, sir. The truth is already in motion. The line went dead. Harry stood frozen, phone still pressed to his ear, listening to empty silence. His carefully constructed world was crumbling, and he could feel the ground disappearing beneath his feet. Someone knew everything. Worse than that, someone was ready to act on that knowledge. He sank into his chair, breathing hard, trying to think through the panic. Who had those documents? How much did they really know? Most importantly, what were they planning to do with the information? His mind went to the people he trusted most, the handful of individuals who knew enough to connect the pieces. Each face appeared in his thoughts like suspects in a crime he hadn't realized he had committed. Then one face stayed longer than the others, refusing to fade. William. No, it couldn't be. His brother wouldn't betray him like that. Despite everything that had happened between them, despite the arguments and the distance and all the years of growing apart, William was still his brother. They had survived their mother's death together, faced the cruelty of public life side by side, shared secrets no one else would ever understand. But even as Harry tried to convince himself, doubt crept in like cold water. William had always been the responsible one, the dutiful heir who put the institution above everything else. If William had discovered the truth about those financial arrangements, what would he do? Would he protect his brother? Or would he protect the crown? Harry's hands trembled as he reached for his phone again. Should he call William directly, demand to know if his own brother was the cause of that warning call? Or would that just confirm suspicions and accelerate whatever process was already underway? Caught between two thrones, Charles sat alone in his private study, the room lit only by a single lamp that cast long shadows across walls lined with centuries of history. In his hands, he held a folder marked with red seals, the kind of classification that meant secrets too dangerous for ordinary eyes. An advisor had delivered it just after midnight, slipping it onto his desk with a grave expression and no words at all. The king had known immediately that whatever lay inside would change everything. With trembling fingers, he opened the cover and began to read. Financial records, transaction logs, account statements showing money flowing through channels that should not exist, names connected to his younger son, arrangements made in darkness, decisions that carried consequences far beyond simple family embarrassment. Dear God, Charles whispered, closing his eyes against the weight of what he now knew. He had sensed something brewing for weeks, perhaps longer. If he was honest with himself, the tension between his sons had grown thick as fog, and palace staff moved through hallways with the careful silence of people trying not to witness a disaster in progress. But Charles had told himself it was just another chapter in their complicated relationship, another storm that would eventually pass. Now he understood. This was different. This was catastrophic. Charles stood and walked to the window, looking out at the palace grounds shrouded in darkness. Somewhere in this building, William was probably also awake, wrestling with the same terrible knowledge. His eldest son, the future king, was burdened with information that could destroy his own brother. Charles knew William well enough to understand the agony that must be tearing him apart. And Harry, his wild, passionate, wounded Harry, what had driven him to make such choices? Charles thought back to the years after Diana's death, watching both his sons struggle to find solid ground in a world that had shifted beneath their feet. William had responded by holding tighter to duty and tradition. Harry had responded by running as far as he could in the opposite direction. I failed them both, Charles murmured to the empty room. He began to pace, his footsteps echoing on polished floors where kings had walked for generations. Each step took him past portraits of ancestors who had faced their own crises, wars, scandals, revolutions. But this felt different somehow, more personal and more painful. Those kings had fought external enemies. Charles was watching his family devour itself from within. The briefing suggested that Harry had not acted alone. Someone had been guiding him, advising him, perhaps even manipulating him into arrangements he didn't fully understand. The thought made Charles's blood run cold. His son, so vulnerable and desperate to prove himself, caught in the web of people who saw him as nothing more than a useful tool. Charles stopped at a mirror and looked at his own reflection, an aging man wearing the weight of a crown he had waited 70 years to receive. The irony was almost unbearable. He had finally achieved the position from which he could truly protect his family, only to discover that the greatest threat came from within. "What would you do, Mother?" he asked the silence, thinking of Elizabeth and the impossible choices she had faced during her long reign, but he knew the answer. She would have chosen the institution over the individual, duty over love, survival of the monarchy over the happiness of any single family member. That was what royalty demanded, the sacrifice of personal feelings on the altar of public service. Charles returned to his desk and read through the documents again, hoping to find some detail he had missed, some explanation that would make this all less damaging. There was none. The evidence was solid, the implications clear, and the danger very real. He thought about William, who must be preparing to act. His eldest son had the strength to do what was necessary, even when it broke his heart. Charles had always admired that quality in William, even as he worried about the cost it exacted on his son's spirit. How much pain could one person endure before something fundamental inside them broke? Then there was Harry, who probably had no idea how close he was to complete exposure. Should Charles warn him, give him a chance to prepare for what was coming, or would that just make everything worse? Give him time to run or hide, or make the situation even more complicated? The king sat back in his chair, feeling every one of his years pressing down on his shoulders. This was the loneliness of leadership that no one talked about. The moments when you had to make decisions that would hurt people you loved, knowing there was no good choice, only different shades of terrible. If William moved forward with revealing the truth, the public scandal would be devastating. The media would feast on royal failure. Critics would call for the abolition of the monarchy, and the institution Charles had spent his life serving might not survive the blow. But if he stopped William, if he buried the evidence and protected Harry from consequences, what message would that send? That royals live by different rules? That family loyalty mattered more than law and ethics? That the crown was just another corrupt institution hiding its sins behind palace walls? Charles stood and walked to the door, then stopped with his hand on the brass handle. Beyond this room, the palace slept in uneasy peace. Servants dreamed in their quarters. Security guards walked their rounds. The great machine of monarchy continued turning as it had for centuries. But morning was coming, and with it decisions that could not be delayed any longer. The documents lay open on his desk, truth waiting to be acknowledged or buried. Outside, dawn was beginning to break over London, painting the sky in shades of red that looked almost like blood. Can a father save both his sons when the only path forward requires sacrificing one to protect the other? The man who found what should have stayed hidden. Thomas Hartley was not the kind of man anyone noticed in a crowd. He was quiet and precise, the sort of person who straightened picture frames without thinking and always arrived exactly 5 minutes early. Thomas was reviewing quarterly account statements, the kind of routine work he had done thousands of times before, when he noticed a transfer that didn't quite fit the pattern. The amount wasn't large, barely enough to raise suspicion, but it was routed through a channel that shouldn't have been accessible to that particular account. He stared at the number on his screen, feeling a slight unease in his stomach. Probably just an administrative error, he told himself. These things happen occasionally in an organization as large and complex as the royal household. But Thomas Hartley had not maintained impeccable financial records for 2 decades by ignoring small irregularities. He made a note in his log and began tracing the transaction backward to its cause. What he found kept him awake that night. The transfer connected to another account which connected to another, forming a chain that led deeper into financial structures he didn't immediately recognize. Thomas spent the next weeks following the trail with the patience of a man solving a puzzle. Each piece revealed a picture he desperately didn't want to see. Offshore entities, shell companies registered in jurisdictions known for secrecy, payments disguised as consulting fees and charitable contributions. And at the center of it all, authorization codes that could only have come from one person, Prince Harry. Thomas sat back in his chair, removing his glasses to rub his tired eyes. This couldn't be right. There had to be some explanation, some legitimate reason for these arrangements that he simply wasn't aware of. The prince wouldn't deliberately involve himself in something improper, would he? But the numbers didn't lie. And Thomas had built his entire career on trusting what the numbers told him. He began working longer hours, staying late in his office after other staff had gone home. He told his wife he was managing year-end accounts, which wasn't entirely untrue. She worried about him, noticing the new lines of stress appearing on his face, but Thomas couldn't tell her what was really keeping him at his desk until midnight. Each file he opened revealed something worse than the last. The network of hidden arrangements was far more extensive than he had initially imagined. Money flowing in from causes that would raise questions if examined too closely. Investments made through intermediaries who specialized in discretion. Agreements signed with people whose names appeared in databases Thomas wished he hadn't searched. "What have you done, Madane?" he whispered to the empty office. Though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to the prince or to himself, the deeper Thomas looked, the clearer it became that this wasn't simply poor judgment or innocent mistakes. This was systematic, carefully constructed, designed to hide financial activities from scrutiny. Someone had helped Prince Harry build this structure. Someone with expertise in evading oversight. Thomas thought about stopping his investigation. He could close the files, delete his notes, pretend he had never noticed that first small irregularity. No one would ever know. The royal family would continue without this crisis, and he could return to his comfortable routine of managing accounts and maintaining order. But every time he considered walking away, he thought about what he owed to the institution he served. The monarchy survived because people trusted it to be different, to operate with integrity even when others didn't. If he buried this truth, wasn't he betraying everything the crown was supposed to represent? He began assembling a comprehensive report, organizing evidence with the same meticulous care he applied to everything in his professional life. Bank statements, transaction records, corporate registrations, email communications, all cross-referenced and verified until there could be no doubt about their authenticity. The hardest decision came when he had to determine who should receive this information. Going directly to the king felt wrong somehow, too explosive and too likely to be suppressed. The palace communications office would certainly bury it. His immediate supervisors would probably tell him to stop investigating matters above his position. That left Prince William. Thomas had never spoken directly to the future king, had only seen him at official functions where staff remained appropriately invisible. But he knew William's reputation, a man who took his responsibilities seriously, who valued duty above personal comfort, who would not ignore evidence simply because it was inconvenient. Still, Thomas hesitated. Bringing this evidence to Prince William meant setting in motion events that could destroy the royal family from within. Brothers would be set against each other. The king would be forced into an impossible position. The public would lose faith in an institution already struggling to prove its relevance in the modern world. "Is this really my choice to make?" Thomas asked himself, staring at the growing stack of documents on his desk. But he already knew the answer. The moment he had discovered that first irregular transfer, he had stepped onto a path with only one destination. Truth didn't care about consequences or feelings or family loyalty. Truth simply existed, waiting to be acknowledged or denied. Thomas worked through the night preparing the final version of his report. He included every piece of evidence, every connection, every document that supported his conclusions. When investigators or historians look back on this moment, they would have no reason to question the accuracy of his work. As dawn broke over London, he printed the final pages and placed them in a folder marked "Confidential, Eyes Only." His hands shook slightly as he sealed the envelope. This report represented months of careful investigation, but it also represented the end of something, Perhaps the end of his career. Perhaps the end of the royal family as everyone knew it. Perhaps the end of his own peace of mind. He had uncovered what should have stayed hidden, and now he would deliver it to someone with the power to act. What happens to the messenger who carries news that will break a kingdom apart? Brothers at war. Prince William stood outside the private library where he had asked Harry to meet him, trying to steady his breathing. In his hands he carried a leather folder containing documents that would end life as they both knew it. The morning light streaming through tall windows felt too bright, too cheerful for what was about to happen. "This is still my brother," William reminded himself quietly, gripping the folder tighter. "Whatever else is true, that remains." He pushed open the heavy oak door and stepped inside. Harry was already there, standing by the fireplace with his back turned, shoulders tense in a way that suggested he knew this wasn't a casual conversation. When he turned around, William saw something in his brother's eyes he had seen before, defiance mixed with fear, like a cornered animal trying to decide whether to fight or flee. "William," Harry said, his voice carefully neutral, "what's this about? Your message said it was urgent." William closed the door behind him, the click of the latch sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet room. He walked to the center of the space, maintaining distance between them, and set the folder on the antique table that separated them like a border neither wanted to cross. "I need to talk to you about some financial matters that have come to light," William said, keeping his tone as gentle as possible despite the storm raging inside his chest. Harry's face shifted almost imperceptibly, a flash of panic quickly masked by confusion. "Financial matters? I don't understand what you're talking about." "I think you do." William opened the folder and pulled out the first document, sliding it across the polished wood surface. "This is a statement from an account registered in your name. The transactions don't match any legitimate royal expenses." Harry glanced at the paper but didn't pick it up, as if touching it would make it real. "There must be some mistake. I have people who handle those things for me." William had expected denial. He had prepared himself for it during the sleepless nights leading up to this moment. Still, hearing his brother lie directly to his face felt like a physical blow. "Harry, please don't do this," William said quietly. "I have months of records, transfers to offshore accounts, payments to shell companies, agreements with people who," his voice caught slightly, "with people who don't have your best interests at heart. You've been investigating me." Harry's shock was giving way to anger now, color rising in his cheeks. "What gives you the right to dig through my private affairs?" "I didn't want to." The words came out louder than William intended, revealing the emotion he was struggling to contain. He took a breath and continued more softly. "Do you think I wanted to find this? Do you think I enjoyed discovering that my own brother has been involved in—" "Involved in what?" Harry interrupted, stepping forward with his hands clenched at his sides. "Say it, William. What exactly are you accusing me of?" William pulled out another document, then another, laying them across the table like cards in a game neither of them could win. Bank statements showing irregular deposits, corporate registrations linking Harry to entities designed for secrecy, email communications suggesting knowledge and intent. "I'm not accusing you," William said, his voice breaking slightly. "I'm showing you what I found, what others will find if this continues." Harry stared at the papers spread before him, his breathing becoming heavier. For a moment, William thought his brother might actually look at the evidence and engage with the reality of what he had done. Instead, Harry swept his arm across the table, scattering documents across the floor. "This is about control," Harry shouted, years of resentment flooding out. "You've always wanted to control everything, haven't you? Perfect William, future king, never makes a mistake. Well, I'm not you. I never wanted to be you." "I know that," William said, fighting to keep his voice steady even as his heart was breaking. "I've always known that, but this isn't about being me or being perfect. This is about choices that could destroy our family." "Our family?" Harry laughed bitterly. "Our family was destroyed a long time ago. Or have you forgotten what this institution did to our mother? what it's done to everyone who tried to live outside its rigid rules. William felt the old wound reopening, the shared grief they rarely spoke about anymore. Don't use Mom as an excuse for this. She would never. Don't you dare tell me what she would or wouldn't do. Harry's voice cracked with emotion. You don't get to decide what her memory means to me. They stood facing each other across the scattered papers, breathing hard, years of unspoken pain and growing distance suddenly visible between them. William could see tears forming in his brother's eyes, matching the ones he was fighting to hold back in his own. I'm trying to help you, William said, his voice barely above a whisper. Before this becomes public. Before there's no way to protect you from the consequences. Protect me? Harry's laugh was hollow. Like you protected me when I wanted to leave. Like you supported my choices. You chose the institution over me a long time ago. Brother, that's not fair, isn't it? Harry picked up one of the documents from the floor, his hands shaking. You want to know how this started? It started because I had nothing. No income of my own. No freedom. No way to build a life that didn't require permission from people who never understood me. So yes, I made arrangements. I took opportunities. I trusted people who said they could help me become independent. Who? Harry. William stepped closer, desperate for his brother to finally be honest. Who helped you set this up? But Harry just shook his head, looking away. It doesn't matter now. It matters to me. William's careful control finally shattered. You're my brother. Do you think I want to be standing here having this conversation? Do you think I want to choose between protecting you and protecting everything we're supposed to represent? The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush them both. Harry sank into a chair, all the fight draining out of him as suddenly as it had appeared. He buried his face in his hands, and William heard a sound that broke his heart. His brother crying the way he used to when they were children, and the world felt too big and too cruel. I didn't know how deep it went, Harry said finally, his voice muffled and broken. I swear I didn't understand what I was getting into. By the time I realized, it was too late to stop. What happens when the truth you've been running from finally catches up, and the only person who can save you is the one you've pushed furthest away? The secret that can no longer be hidden. Prince William stood at his desk in the early hours of morning, staring at blank paper that demanded words he didn't want to write. The statement that would change everything sat unfinished before him, each attempted sentence feeling like a betrayal of the brother he had once protected from playground bullies and paparazzi cameras alike. His hand trembled as he picked up his pen. To whom it may concern, he began, then stopped. Too formal, too cold. He crumpled the paper and started again. It is with deep regret. No, that sounded like an apology. And this wasn't something to apologize for. This was necessary. This was right. This was the only choice that protected the institution he had sworn to serve. But why did doing the right thing feel so much like destroying everything he loved? William set down the pen and walked to the window, watching dawn break over London. Somewhere in this city, ordinary people were waking up to ordinary problems, blissfully unaware that the royal family they read about in newspapers was tearing itself apart behind palace walls. They believed in the fairy tale, the handsome princes, the glittering crowns, the happily ever after that never quite existed except in stories. He thought about his children still sleeping peacefully in their beds. What kind of world was he creating for them? One where family loyalty meant nothing in the face of scandal? Or one where accountability mattered even when it hurt the people you loved most? Daddy? A small voice asked from the doorway. William turned to find his eldest standing there in pajamas, hair tousled from sleep. What are you doing up so early? You weren't in bed. I got worried. William's heart clenched. Even his children could sense that something fundamental was breaking. He crossed the room and knelt down, pulling his child close. I'm all right, just have some work to finish. Is Uncle Harry in trouble? The question hit William like a punch to the stomach. How did children always know? How did they sense the cracks before adults admitted they existed? He held his child tighter, breathing in the innocent scent of youth that still believed families could solve anything if they just tried hard enough. Sometimes grown-ups make choices that have consequences, William said carefully. And sometimes other grown-ups have to help fix those choices even when it's hard. Will Uncle Harry be okay? William didn't have an answer that was both honest and reassuring. So he simply held his child and wished desperately that love was enough to solve everything. Later that morning, William sat in a private meeting room with his father and a small group of trusted advisors. King Charles looked older than William had ever seen him, the weight of this crisis carving new lines into his face. Their eyes met across the table, and William saw his own pain reflected back, a father watching his sons destroy each other, powerless to stop it. "The statement is ready," William said quietly, sliding the final draft across the polished surface. Charles picked it up with shaking hands and read silently. When he finished, he set it down and removed his glasses to wipe his eyes. "Once you release this, there's no taking it back. I know your brother will never forgive you." "I know that too." William's voice cracked despite his best efforts to remain composed. Charles looked at his eldest son with an expression of profound sorrow. "I wish I could tell you there was another way. I've spent sleepless nights trying to find one." "So have I, Father. But the evidence is overwhelming. If we don't control how this comes out, someone else will, and that will be worse for everyone." One of the advisors cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, your Royal Highness, there's something else you should know before moving forward." William felt ice settle in his stomach. What else could there possibly be? The advisor opened a folder and pulled out additional documents. "We've traced the origins of Prince Harry's financial arrangements. While he certainly participated, he wasn't the architect." "What do you mean?" Charles leaned forward, sudden alertness replacing his exhaustion. "Someone with significant financial expertise guided him into these structures. Someone who stood to benefit substantially from the arrangements. We've identified that person." The name, when spoken aloud, landed like an explosion in the quiet room. It was someone they had trusted, someone who had been welcomed into family gatherings, who had offered advice during difficult times, who had positioned themselves as a loyal friend while systematically using Harry's access and royal status for personal gain. William felt sick. His brother hadn't just made poor choices. He had been deliberately manipulated by someone who saw him as nothing more than a useful tool. "Does Harry know?" William asked. "We don't believe so. All evidence suggests he thought this person was genuinely helping him achieve independence." Charles stood abruptly and walked to the window, his back to the room. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "That changes things. If Harry was used, if he was manipulated by someone we all trusted, it doesn't change the fact that he participated willingly," William said, though the words tasted bitter. "It doesn't erase the damage or the legal implications, but it explains them." Charles turned back to face his son. "It gives context. It shows that your brother, for all his mistakes, was a victim in this as well." William thought about the meeting with Harry just days before, his brother's tears, his broken admission that he hadn't understood how deep the situation went. At the time, William had thought it was just another excuse. Now he wondered if Harry had been telling the truth. "What do you want me to do?" William asked his father. Charles walked back to the table and placed his hand on the statement William had written. "I want you to do what you believe is right, but I also want you to include the full truth, not just about what Harry did, but about who led him there and why." The statement was rebutted us. The revelations were prepared, and as afternoon sunlight filtered through ancient windows, William made the announcement that would reshape their family forever. The response was immediate and overwhelming. News outlets exploded with coverage. The person who had manipulated Harry was exposed, their carefully constructed reputation crumbling under the weight of evidence. Legal proceedings began. Public opinion swirled in confused patterns. Some condemned Harry, others sympathized with him as a victim. Everyone had opinions about a family they had never truly known. Through it all, William maintained his composure in public while breaking apart in private. Catherine found him one night sitting in the dark, staring at his phone where text messages to Harry went unanswered. "He won't talk to me," William said, his voice hollow. "I tried to explain that exposing the whole truth actually helps him, shows he was manipulated, but he won't even read my messages." Catherine sat beside him and took his hand. "He's hurt and scared. Give him time." "What if time doesn't fix this? What if I've destroyed our relationship permanently?" She didn't have an answer, so she just held him while he finally let himself cry. Harry, for his part, had retreated from public view entirely. The revelation that he had been used by someone he trusted had shattered what remained of his carefully constructed independence. He was facing legal consequences, yes, but also the humiliating realization that his rebellion against royal constraints had been orchestrated by someone who never cared about him at all. King Charles moved between his sons like a bridge trying to span an ocean, loving both, unable to fully reach either. Months passed. The immediate crisis faded into ongoing legal proceedings and quieter family pain. The monarchy survived as it always had, by adapting and enduring. One evening, William received an unexpected visitor. Harry stood at his door, looking smaller, somehow worn down by everything that had happened. "Can we talk?" Harry asked quietly. William stepped aside without a word, letting his brother enter. They sat in the same library where their confrontation had taken place. But this time the atmosphere was different. Less anger, more exhaustion, both of them too tired to fight anymore. "I read the full statement," Harry said. "All of it, including the parts about—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm sorry you were used," William said. "I'm sorry someone we trusted betrayed you like that. I'm sorry I didn't listen to you sooner. Sorry I let pride and anger keep me from seeing what was really happening." They sat in silence for a long moment. Two brothers who had survived their mother's death, the cruelty of public life, and now this, the worst crisis of their adult lives. "I don't know how we come back from this," Harry admitted. "Neither do I," William answered honestly. "But maybe we don't have to have all the answers right now. Maybe we just start by sitting in the same room without shouting at each other." Harry's laugh was small and broken, but it was real. "That's a low bar. We have to start somewhere." Outside, the sun was setting on another day in the long history of a family that had survived worse and would somehow survive this too. They were damaged, certainly, changed forever. Absolutely, but not destroyed, not yet. As darkness fell over the palace, two brothers sat together in uncertain silence, neither knowing what the future held, but both finally willing to face it honestly.